What is up, guys? Boris here, and today I'm coming to you guys with my top 5 tips for how to properly socket your characters on One Piece Treasure Cruise Global. Now, with 4.0 just released last night, a lot of people have a lot of questions as to how to properly socket them, and today I'm going to bring you my top tips on how to do it based on my experience on One Piece Treasure Cruise Japan. Now, I've made a whole socket guide already, and I'll leave that in the description down below, so if you want a full in-depth analysis, make sure to check that out. But like I said, this will be primarily an overview, primarily just my top tips to help you guys do your sockets properly on Japan and make sure that you don't mess up. So that said, guys, go ahead and get started with my first tip. The first tip I want to give you guys is that there is a certain ranking when it comes to the sockets. Now, this is not universal. This does not apply to every character, but it is effective for most cases. And so the ranking is that at the top two, you're going to want to put anti-bind resistance and anti-despair resistance. Now you can just call them bind and despair resistance, or anti-lock, anti-chain as we call them on Japan, but these are the two best sockets that you can put on a character. And so I really recommend that when you're starting off, the characters with 2 socket slots, primarily, when you want to put those on those guys, and if you have 4 socket slots, 3 to 4, definitely put those 2 on there as well. Now the reason that these are so important is because there are certain dungeons that require these sockets later on, whereas if you don't have them, you might be unable to run the dungeon in a fast manner or at all. So these are the ones that you want to start stocking up on early before you get to that point where you need them. Next, after those 2 is going to be, you want the slot rate boost, or matching orbs as we call them on Japan. So the slot rate boost and the charge specials, or cooldown. Those are the second tier of orbs, and when it comes down to these, sometimes you have to pick between one or the other, especially with units with 3 socket slots, and that's really going to be up to you, and I'll talk about a little bit how you can decide whether to use one or the other. But like I said, the first tier is chain and silence, and then the second tier is going to be these are not very essential in that you don't really need them to run certain dungeons. It's not like it's going to make or break it. But they are nice and will help you run it not only faster, but can get those matching orbs, can really help down the road. So that's going to be the next tier, and then the final tier is going to be auto heal. So auto heal, and then what's called damage reduction. Now, auto heal and damage reduction, these are very nice complements. You're going to use them on, for instance, some characters that have 5 socket slots, primarily the 6 stars. You're going to want to put one of those 2 on there, depending on which one. It depends. Like for instance, Whitebeard, you might want to put damage reduction on there, or I have auto heal on my Rayleigh on Japan. And those are just very nice, but again, I don't really prioritize those in most cases over the other 4. But when it comes to the last 4, I don't even consider them in the tiers because I don't tend to use them. No one really tends to use them, with the exception of rare cases. Some people do put recovery boost on their characters, but for the most part, poison resistance, map damage resistance, and resilience are not very good. So I recommend avoiding those in the beginning, and later on, once you understand the system a bit more, if you want to delve into those, you can. But for the most part, you want to avoid them early on. So my second tip is that you want to make sure that you evolve your characters before you start socketing them. Now, I know it can be hard to resist having, like 10 Luffys and you want to go ahead and socket them, but if the problem is that when you evolve a character, a large majority of the time, they will actually gain a socket slot. And the way sockets work is if you get a socket and you can't use it, you wasted it. So for instance, let's say that you're doing someone with a 1 socket slot, right? And you get you get a chain resistance and a silence resistance, or whatever they're called on global. Then all of a sudden you can only pick one, and you wasted the other. Whereas if you had evolved it ahead of time and gotten those 2 socket slots, then at that point you wouldn't have wasted it. And trust me, you don't want to waste any of them because it can be a huge pain just to get one of them. So I highly recommend that you always evolve your characters before you start socketing them. That's why I always try to get 1 raid boss early on, and then evolve it, and then next time it comes around, farm it, or evolve it before skill up comes around. Same with Fortnite characters. I always want to evolve the Fortnite characters before I start socketing them, before I start feeding any of them to them, because I don't want to waste the sockets. And like I said, it really does become a pain if you do mess up on any of them. So again, my second tip is always evolve your characters before socketing. Now my third tip is going to be make sure to play to both your strengths and your weakness of your character. So what do I mean by that? Perfect example of this is Raid Boss Kuma. Now Raid Boss Kuma, he changes a lot of different types of orbs into matching orbs. So because he's an orb manipulator that I normally use to typically 1 to 2 shot a certain boss, I'm not really worried about getting matching orbs because I will get matching orbs with his ability, and then I can normally use an orb boost plus a type boost to take out the boss. So instead of putting matching orbs on him, I want to make sure that his third socket slot is something different, like cooldown, right? And not only will this allow me to run it faster if I get a cooldown level 1 or 2, but it also is not a waste, seeing as how, again, I don't really need matching orbs. So you want to make sure to be well aware of what your characters are doing and their specials are doing to make sure you properly socket them, especially, like I said, those with 3 socket slots, because you're going to want to pick, it's going to be tough to pick between those 3, right? And then, again, just be careful with certain types of abilities and certain stuff like that, and then you should be fine as long as you're well aware of what you're doing with each unit. So that's my third tip, is make sure to be aware of the strengths and the weaknesses. My fourth tip, and this is probably one of the most important ones that a lot of people don't do, but it really does help if you do this, is that you want to go ahead and build your teams ahead of time. Now, you don't have to have the units necessarily, but you want to go ahead and plot out what your certain teams that you're trying to build look like, and go ahead and try to see what kind of sockets each character would have theoretically, and that way you can get a good idea of what kind of sockets you need on your characters. If you're, let's say you're running a Mihawk slasher team, there's a certain slasher team that you really want to run that's like, sort of like your dream team, right? Then you want to go ahead and plot it out. And I'm going to put some good examples of this from the OPTC Academy Instagram page that they put on there. I'm going to show you guys some cool examples of some crocodile team, to go ahead and plan out some Mihawk teams and Ace teams, like a lot of teams you can find on that page. But it's just like cool examples of how they go ahead and plan out their sockets ahead of time. And I highly recommend that you guys do the same, especially with knowing that some characters have 4, some characters have 2. It can be a big mess, and you don't want to waste socket slots. To be honest, you want to try to get as many levels of each one as possible. So again, if you build your team ahead of time, you'll have a better idea of which ones you need, and I highly recommend that you guys do that. So that's going to be my tip number 4, is build your team ahead of time. And finally, my final tip is going to be to make sure to not socket Blackbeard with anti-silence or despair resistance, whatever you want to call it. This is sort of a very niche tip, but considering that the Blackbeard tank team is one of the strongest teams in the game, you don't want to mess it up. Now, the reason I say don't put despair resistance on him is because of the fact that once he does get gloomed or despair, he'll lose pretty much, I think, what is like 75% of his health or something. He loses a lot of his health for the team. And then if you're running double Blackbeard, and so what this will allow you to do is that there's actually combos with his special, so then you do massive amounts of damage. And so if you put a despair resistance on Blackbeard or your Blackbeard team, you won't be able to do it. So I highly recommend that you do not put despair resistance on Blackbeard or teams or characters on your Blackbeard team. Otherwise, you won't be able to take advantage of one of the biggest combos in the game. So that's just that, and it can also apply to certain other characters or teams. I can't really think of any at the moment, but you can always keep an eye out for that. Make sure that some characters just don't need certain things, like Whitebeard. You're not going to put health, right, or whatever, auto health, and because it didn't put him above the 30% range, and then you can't get his buff. So stuff like that, very important that you don't put certain sockets on certain characters, and the most important one is probably Blackbeard, like I said. So those are going to be my 5 tips for socketing characters on global or Japan even, I guess. And if you want, again, a full in-depth analysis, I'll leave the full socket guide in the description down below. And hopefully these tips will help you guys to go ahead and start doing your sockets on global, because they are a very important part of the game, and they do add a lot of cool value to farming. However, they can be a pain to farm, so but you guys will find that out over time. So that said, guys, thanks a lot for watching. If you have any more questions, let me know down below in the comments or on Twitter. That said, guys, until next time, peace.